in my opinion, a good classification scheme. But with any classification scheme, there's rules to the exception. Fortified almond milk is also considered an ultra-processed food, but we know from many studies that can be healthy and can be safely consumed, for the general population.
Welcome back to another episode of the Peak Performance Life podcast. Today, I am very, very extra excited to be talking about a topic that is actually very near and dear to my heart. And I think it is a topic that not enough people talk about or are aware about. And we have an expert. We have Dr. Stephan Van Vliet, and he's a nutrition scientist with metabolomics expertise in the Center for Human Nutrition Studies at Utah State University. He earned his Ph.D. in kinesiology, and his research is performed at the nexus of agricultural and human health. He routinely collaborates with farmers, ecologists, and agricultural scientists to study critical linkages between sustainable agriculture, the nutrient density of food, and human health. His work has been published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, Scientific Reports, the Journal of Nutrition, and the Journal of Physiology. So a lot of great information we're going to cover today about regenerative farming practices, grass-fed versus not grass-fed meat. So Dr. Stephan, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Talor. I appreciate it.
Great. Well, why don't we start with a little background, just a brief background of kind of how you got interested in all of this and how you got to where you are today doing all this research.
So it started actually during my bachelor's, and I was doing business administration, studying business administration during my bachelor's. But I got very interested in exercise and nutrition science, and was reading physiology journals instead of economy journals. So I figured it was time for a switch. So I made a switch during my master's. I did a master's in exercise and nutrition science. Was initially early on in my career focused on sports nutrition, but I kind of gradually moved into more clinical nutrition. And I've always had an interest in farming and agriculture. And over the last couple of years, we're kind of merging the two, seeing, especially if regenerative agriculture or agroecology is really what we call it in scientific terms. It's farming systems that more closely align with natural systems. Well, what is their impact on human health? And is there a connection between the two?
That's great. Yeah. And this is something, again, I watched the documentary. Is it called Kiss the Ground? I think it is something about regenerative farming practices and how, how the soil health would be so much better if we follow these practices, how the health of the animals, the nutrients of the animals and all these kind of things. But yeah, could you maybe start by explaining to people just briefly, what is regenerative agriculture, or the other name, and how does it differ from what's currently being used in mass right now?
Yeah, there's no set term for regenerative agriculture at the moment. It's a little bit of a wild west, but it typically means that you improve the system. Or regenerate it. It can be an improvement in soil health, in the health of your crops, or the health of your pasture in case you have animal agriculture. And it also takes into account, I should say, social justice, equity, if you look at it on a broader scale. But yeah, the term agroecology is more accepted, at least in the scientific field, but that's really what regenerative agriculture is, at least to me. And agroecology is basically the blending of agriculture and farming and sort of urban living all together. But what it really means is that you're following farming systems that more closely mimic natural ecosystems. So that could be integrated crop livestock systems, multi-cropping systems, right? Because the norm is to have a giant field of a monoculture where you're just growing one crop, be it a carrot or be it corn. But in natural ecosystems, there's generally a whole diversity of plants on a given field. So that is really what regenerative agriculture is about, is mimicking more closely natural systems with the goal to improve the system. And usually that's literally from the ground up, starting with soil health, and which obviously has a relationship with the plants that is growing on it. And then if animals graze those plants, then you sort of get this accumulation through the food web. And then hopefully also get circularity, where the animal is putting nutrients back into the soil, grazes the plants properly, but does not overgraze them, which can stimulate new plant growth, resulting carbon sequestration. And then, of course, the last piece is the human health aspect. And most of the things that we're looking at the moment, and other groups as well, is, well, what is the impact on the nutritional composition? Does it accumulate more vitamins and minerals? Does it accumulate more phytochemicals and antioxidants? And things like that, because if we have improved soil health, does that translate into a more nutritious plant?
Yeah. I mean, it's a very important topic. I mean, kind of the paleo community and many health conscious people, including myself, for many years, focus on eating grass-fed meat. But a lot of people may not really know why or understand why or have seen any kind of study about that. So let's maybe get into that a little bit. What are some of the studies that you and your study group have done?
So we are working on a major profiling of the supply chain, both grass-fed and grain-fed beef. We termed it the Beef Nutrient Density Project. So the goal is to reach about 200 farms. So we've sourced 3 steaks from farms all across North America. And this is really anything from sort of rotationally grazed grass-fed to animals more grazing monocultures to animals finished on feedlots on grains. And even within the feedlot part, we are looking at different days on feed, right? Some farmers, especially smaller feedlots, they might only finish on corn for 30 days. What is the impact of that versus maybe 120 days? So a feedlot isn't a feedlot and grass-fed isn't grass-fed. And we are trying to understand which practices leads to the most nutritious piece of beef. And we're looking at multiple things in that. One of the major things that has been studied in the past, and what we are studying too, is omega-3 fatty acid profiles. So the omega-6 to 3 ratio is typically a good indicator of quality. And grass-fed beef has typically an omega-6 to 3 ratio of about 2 to 1, 1 to 1, which means for every omega-6, there is 1 molecule of omega-3s if you have a 1-to-1 ratio, which is kind of the sort of the holy grail. And I believe that is important because we are not probably consuming enough omega-3s in our diet if we look at it compared to historic diets. The standard American diet has an omega-6 to 3 ratio of about 15 to 1. And historic diets or more whole foods based diets typically have an omega-6 to 3 ratio of 5 to 1, especially when you're consuming meat and milk for pastured animals, consuming fatty fish. And then the next part of that is also we're running a series of clinical trials to understand if what we're seeing, and that's what we're seeing, we are seeing that it accumulates more antioxidants in the meat. It has more omega-3s, more beta-carotene and alpha-tocopherol, so vitamin A, vitamin E. But does that actually translate into an appreciable effect on human health? And that's what we're trying to understand through a series of clinical trials. And that work has not been performed much yet. So,
wow, amazing that it hasn't been performed much. I'm glad you were doing it. So yeah, we recently had one of the world's experts on omega-3 on the podcast as well, talking about all the benefits of omega-3 and how so many people are deficient in it. So you mentioned the grass-fed can have a 1 to 2 or 1 to 1 ideally. What are you seeing with ones that are kind of just, I guess, what would we call the other one? Grain-fed?
Yeah, grain-fed or regular beef or conventional beef. They're finished in feedlots typically for 120 days, cattle. And they're being fed a total mixed ration, which is usually makes up a large part made up out of grains, typically corn, but it could be other byproducts as well, distillers grains, and as well as some hay in there. But yes, it does negatively alter the omega-6 to 3 ratio. In feedlot beef, it's on average about 8 to 1. So 8 molecules of omega-6 to 1 omega-3. And then in feedlot beef, it's 1 to 1 or 2 to 1. So there's a much larger amount of omega-3s. And there have been some studies done, some clinical trials performed. And what they have found is that if people consume grass-fed beef, or I should say meat from pastured animals, it can be for chickens and pigs and other species as well, you typically see an increase in the blood omega-3 profiles of consumers. But when people in the arm in the randomized control trial that consume grain finished beef, they typically do not change, and that's been known for a while. But what we're also observing is that the changes or the differences between grass-fed and grain-fed beef go beyond just their omega-3 profiles. There's differences in vitamins, particularly fat-soluble vitamins. There's differences in phytochemicals, which are typically more known to the consumer as antioxidants. These are molecules that could, at least, or are associated with a decreased risk of metabolic disease. And if you throw them on a petri dish in a lab, they might have antioxidant effects. So we're trying to understand if that is also something that is impacting health, because you can definitely see it on the sort of the metabolic health profile of the animal, that is typically improved. But whether that translates to humans eating that meat, we don't know that yet.
Interesting. And I mean, it's primarily, I guess, because they're eating, they're eating plants, right? So a more phytonutrient, I guess, kind of diet, which many people talk about, right? As humans, we should be eating more phytonutrients. So in this way, we're consuming animals that are eating more phytonutrients compared to animals that are being fed most likely GMO corn. In fact, almost definitely it's GMO corn, probably, right, that they're being fed in the other case, and therefore they're not getting kind of any phytonutrients. They're getting less omega-3. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Indeed, we've done actually some profiling of total mixed ration, which was made up of 80% corn, but also of corn only from very conventional cornfields. And yeah, if you look at those phytonutrients or those antioxidants in the corn, in the corn itself, they're about 5,000 to 10,000% lower compared to fresh forages. And then total mixed ration, which contains some hay, contains some more phytonutrients, but they're clearly coming from the hay, the dried grass portion, as opposed to from the corn. And what we're seeing is especially the diversity piece is important, seems to be important. If animals are grazing on biodiverse pastures, can kind of self-select the plants, almost like a buffet style, right? It's like with humans, we notice too, dietary diversity is important. Typically, that leads to better micronutrient profiles. And in animals, it's not that different. It's just another mammal. So if the cow can sort of graze from the buffet, and that buffet being a diverse pasture, you typically see more accumulation of these phytochemicals. And of course, in our own diet, fruits and vegetables are the primary source of these phytochemicals. But what is unique about animals is that they consume vegetation that you and I cannot consume. So it's a further way of increasing certain phytochemicals, as well as getting some unique compounds that we may not have access to as much normally.
Right. Yeah, I've always heard our stomachs are not meant to digest grass like a cow's are, right? So, they're going to be consuming some different nutrients that we aren't. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What about, have you looked at all, I'm just curious, regarding organic and if pesticides have anything to do here? Because obviously the grain-fed, being fed GMO corn that we know is probably very heavily sprayed with pesticides compared to grass-fed. But I guess grass-fed, could it be still, I mean, because there is organic grass-fed and then there's just regular grass-fed, right? So I guess it could still be pesticides, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, in our experience from working directly with many farmers and visiting farms, is that most folks that would consider practicing regenerative agriculture spray little to none. Maybe if there's a field with some invasive weeds, they might spray a little bit, but that's rare. Typically, that's the last resort. So while technically, if you're not organic grass-fed, you could potentially use pesticides, but in practice, almost no one does that because it is not really in line with regenerative agriculture. But also important to note is that even when animals are eating corn that has been sprayed with Roundup, with glyphosate, it being water soluble, the animal does provide a bit of a buffer. So you barely detect, or mainly detected below the lower limit of detection. So there's not really much pesticide accumulation as in sort of Roundup pesticide accumulation. What happens is with some forever chemicals like DDT, yeah, those accumulate in the fat portion and can sometimes be in meat. But the part though is that can be something a farmer has done before you 30 years ago, right? And it's still in the soil, and there's not much that you can do about it other than waiting long enough to for things to turn over, even though some of these chemicals break down very slowly or not at all. So there's a nuance in there, but yeah, typically even with sort of grain-fed beef, you typically do not detect any pesticide residue in there. We occasionally detect some residue of antibiotics in there, definitely not in all samples, but you do see a little bit of that in there, and we have not been able to measure that typically in grass-fed beef, just because there's typically no provision of low-dose antibiotics.
That's great. Oh, that's a great distinction there as well, and also for good for people to know, right? So, grass-fed, obviously much more nutrient dense, better omega-3 ratio, but organic may not be. In some cases, it may obviously be much better. But I guess maybe for people on a budget, for example, just opting for the regular grass-fed meat versus the more expensive organic grass-fed meat might not make as big of a difference as, maybe myself or other people may have thought of previously.
I think it's a fair assessment. And even then, Laura, I would argue that, within a general American diet, even grain-fed beef is probably fairly healthy if you compare it to sort of the large amounts of ultra-processed foods, right? Because I sort of, and we're seeing that in some studies as well, is that even if we're feeding people grass-fed beef or grain-fed beef as part of an overall healthy diet, people definitely get healthier compared to their standard American diet that they typically consume. So while this can have some importance, I would say in the overall grand scheme of things of the standard Western diet, the standard American diet, the difference between grass-fed and grain-fed is not going to be as big as, throwing all your ultra-processed foods out of your pantry and eat some whole foods and some, fresh meat and dairy and fruits and vegetables and fish and things like that, right? That's going to have a far more dramatic effect. I jokingly like to say sometimes that if most fast food outlets switched out their grain-fed beef for grass-fed beef, a Happy Meal is not going to be a healthy meal still.
You know what? I was just going to say that. I always think about this too. When I think about like a McDonald's meal and you have, let's say a burger with the bun, with French fries, with the soda, I think the soda and the French fries and the bun are probably the worst part, but yet everyone vilifies, the meat part of it, right? But it's probably every other piece that's worse for you than the actual meat. Yeah,
I would argue that if you switched out those grain-fed patties with grass-fed patties, that is not going to make a dent in your health if you're consuming it with soda and buns and a bunch of refined carbohydrates. And yeah, you're not going to maybe your omega-3 profile will increase a little bit, but you're still ingesting probably a large amounts of N6, right? Omega-6 that are typically used in shelf-stable ultra-processed foods.
Yeah. And I think people listening hopefully have heard of the importance of the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio that we've been talking about here. It's rumored that back in the, kind of paleo caveman days, we were much, much closer to a 1-to-2 kind of, ratio overall. Whereas now I've heard some estimates as high as like 40-to-1 or, really crazy, outrageous ratios, when you look at people who are eating, like you said, ultra processed foods, super high carb diets, things of that nature. And then, I personally believe that becomes very dangerous for people's health.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, there's always uncertainties in science, but I would argue that at least our understanding of omega-3 fatty acids is such that, and it doesn't always shake out in randomized controlled trials, especially on fish oil, but that's a whole different topic, is taking sort of bioactive compounds out of the natural food matrix and then providing this as supplements. That doesn't always shake out as well. But we do know that diets rich in omega-3s fish, but also pastured animals. They're associated with good health, and omega-3s also in sort of multiple lines of evidence. Rodent work, in vitro work in a petri dish, or epidemiology and randomized controlled trials. I'd say there's a convergence of evidence to suggest that they can have anti-inflammatory effects, antioxidant effects, could potentially lower risk of cancer and heart disease and things as such. So for omega-3s, I'd feel pretty comfortable in stating that in a current American diet, it'd be a good thing to increase the amount.
Yep. And what about, have you done any kind of research, or have you looked at all at plant-based meat?
We published a study in Scientific Reports in 2021, and we compared a popular plant-based meat alternative to grass-fed beef. Both of them are sort of, touted as quote-unquote healthier versions of beef. And what was particularly interesting is that when you looked at the nutrition facts panels, which just gives us information about protein, fat, a handful of vitamins and minerals, they looked somewhat identical. The reason is because the plant-based meat alternative used soy protein isolates, so it was able to bring the protein ratio up to beef, but also used vitamins and minerals fortification that were fortified with the product. So we're kind of able to match the nutrition facts panel of beef. But we were still interested, especially when we were deep in metabolomics, which looks at hundreds or thousands of nutrients. We were like, well, wait a minute. This is a plant versus an animal. There's probably going to be some compositional differences that go beyond the nutrition facts panel. And that is indeed what we found. That was not that surprising, but the magnitude of differences was a little bit surprising to me, to be honest. What we found is that sort of the abundance of metabolites of many nutrients. These are things that do not appear on nutrition facts panels, but it could be things like taurine, carnosine, and serine, which are amino acid peptides occurring in meat. But then on the other hand, in the soy-based meat alternative, we found isoflavones, certain phenols that we didn't find in the beef. But the short end of it is that they were 90% difference in metabolite abundance, and about a third of all nutrients that we tested were not found in either the beef or the plant-based meat alternative. So this led us to the conclusion that these are not one-to-one nutritionally interchangeable. They're very much as different as you expect a plant and an animal to be, a carrot and an egg to be, right? To give you another example. So that is what we found. And you could say from this work whether one was healthier than another. That's not what we tested, but we just profiled the food sources and we're like, hey, if we take into account sort of all these large number of compounds that are in foods, then clearly there are some compositional differences, and there's maybe some caution warranted about thinking that you can just switch these out one to one and you get the same nutrients. And I thought that was at least important for consumers to know and for clinicians as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Very important. Plant-based meat would that be considered a processed food? It would be, right? It
meets the NOVA 4 classifications of ultra-processed foods. One caveat to that, though, is that, NOVA is in my opinion, a good classification scheme. But with any classification scheme, there's rules to the exception. Fortified almond milk is also considered an ultra-processed food, but we know from many studies that can be healthy and can be safely consumed, for the general population. So it's not that every food that is ultra processed is per se unhealthy. But that's also unfortunately not what we're consuming, right? If we look at the NOVA 4 classification, it's cookies, pastries, donuts, pizza, you name it, buns, sugary breakfast cereals. Those are the type of foods that we're talking about, and not so much the exception to the rule. And there are some studies that would suggest that Dr. Chris Gardner out of Stanford did a study called the Swap Meat Trial. He fed his participants Beyond Beef or grass-fed beef. And they found no difference in inflammatory profiles and some benefit for Beyond Beef in cholesterol profiles, with the LDL cholesterol being lowered a bit. So, obviously, what that implies to me is that, potentially both can be part of a healthy diet, provided you consume it as part of a diverse diet that was consumed at the background of an omnivorous diet. So that is important to note.
Yeah. With regards to kind of circling back to regenerative farming, or what's the correct terminology I should be using?
Well, it's agroecology, and if you read
agroecology, I
yes.
like that. Okay, agroecology. There's also so many other benefits, right? So you kind of mentioned in passing earlier, like the carbon, right? How it can be pulling carbon as well when you have a healthier soil. That a lot of these farms, that use these practices are doing, right? So we're talking about huge benefits, for the environment potentially there. We're talking about benefits, obviously, to the animals and as well as, for the food as well. Are you? Can you talk about again, a little bit more about the benefits?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's at least some more recent work that is coming out that especially when animals are grazing what is formerly degraded crop fields or sort of not so well managed fields, that you can have carbon sequestration. It might plateau at some point, but if it does, then I'd say great. We've achieved what we were set out to achieve. But yeah, there's an opportunity to indeed sequester carbon. We obviously have to weigh that with methane emissions, but it's certainly not as black and white as people sometimes suggest in saying like animals bad, plants good. That's an oversimplification. Livestock can be managed very well and can have potentially minimal impacts or beneficial impacts. And again, there's some nuances to that because, we've often critiqued the monoculture in crops, but we've also kind of turned our animal agriculture, narrowed it to 3 species, being beef, pork, and chicken, right? And there's maybe some concern about that. Maybe it'd be better to integrate more animals together, multi-species grazing. But okay, if we simplify it a bit, yeah, what you typically see is that when animals are rotationally grazed on pasture and you measure soils, and you do that in adjacent, we've measured it, for instance, one study that we did was we sampled soil from pastures that were managed sort of regeneratively with rotational grazing. And then we found the nearest pasture that was more, continuously grazed. So, and then we also found nearby the closest cornfield. And you do see that sort of the highest markers of soil health being soil organic matter, total exchange capacity, mineral content of soil was the highest in the rotationally grazed fields and the lowest in the corn monoculture fields. And what was interesting is that all these fields were in a mile of each other. So it's independent of sort of the ecoregion or climatic factors, and I would argue due to the management of that. So you do see this initial relationship with soil health. So it could have indeed co-benefits as well. And then, another important part, I think, is that especially when animals are finished out on pasture, right, or they are put into a feedlot, you kind of break that carbon cycle a bit because you're having more inputs in the feedlot. You're not, again, don't want to paint with broad strokes because some feedlots do a good job in collecting waste and putting that, reusing that. But typically, you're not putting the nutrients back into the field always, right? And so that's where sort of having grazing animals on the land can be of benefit. Again, if you can integrate this with wildlife, and we see this certainly with some farmers that have a thriving deer population on their ranches as well, and see beaver populations return. But yeah, these things are, and bird populations, but these things are also notoriously hard to study and to quantify. So while there has been more work done in that regard, there's certainly more work that needs to be done and to systematically catalog that. But every sort of farmer or even a research group that is more into ecology than I am, I speak to, it always says, well, Stephan, all good and all, but this is so difficult to measure. And when we do field days, we notice that too, for sure. My own eyes tell me that, okay, I don't think this is destroying the earth when I'm on the farm, right? And there's teeming wildlife, bird population, see deer, see a good integration with livestock. Of course, you're always going to have some trade-offs between livestock and wild herbivores. But that's probably a whole nother hour discussion. But anyway, if I then go back to my office, I could convince myself what I just saw is the absolute worst thing because of methane emissions. So that's why I think we need to be careful in that we take into account broader ecosystems as well, and try to better understand how we can potentially use grazing animals, and preferably a variety of them, right? Not just beef, rabbits, geese, turkey, duck, goats, you name it, right? And seeing if we can sort of create synergies there, which is part of agroecology. If you look at agroecology, right, in natural landscapes, you don't just see one animal. You see a whole diversity of animals. So if we look at agroecology, that's probably what, in my opinion, what we should explore.
Yeah, nice. Nice, yeah. And I mean, also one, I think, important thing that you mentioned is that when, with these types of farming practices, the fact that they're using very little pesticides, I know we discussed that it doesn't make a huge impact with regards to actually meat, but for vegetables, right? For other things, I mean, I feel very strongly about, the negative effects of glyphosate, Roundup. I personally don't want to be eating foods that's been sprayed with that, or GMO crops that are made to be able to withstand such heavy spraying of chemicals. And that's how they've been modified to be able to withstand that, so that they can spray so much. To be able to grow so much of this. That's not what I want to be consuming. So I think there's certainly that aspect of it. And is there a push being made? I would certainly love to see many more farmers kind of. Why haven't more farmers made the switch then to these farming practices that are better for the environment, produce healthier food, all those kind of things?
Well, there's certainly an increasing number of farmers that are exploring this, and instead of maybe selling their animals off to the feedlot, they're finishing them out on pasture themselves. Mainly also because you can get a premium on that meat, right? If you sell it directly to consumers, especially. Mm-hmm. So there's a growing number of farmers. Sort of what we are seeing, and then others can definitely speak better this to me, but just when we interact with a lot of farmers. It's just the start, or sort of this idea of like, oh, this is how we've been doing it for 30 years. And this is how my grandfather or my father has done it. And so sort of, it usually there's a generational change that we see, that farmers are trying this, or there's some sort of, catastrophic event that forces them to change, right? Because you're, no longer financially viable, or you lose all your crops and things like that. So that's kind of what it is. It's with a turning of generations, this comes up. But yeah, I mean, with anything, right? And this is not just in farming, but in any profession, doing something new is always uncomfortable and scary in the beginning. And there's a risk to it as well. There's a risk that you can fail. And in farming, that risk is probably even greater because you don't have as much cushion, perhaps. Because you're not. Yeah, it's. I think that's not making a lot of money. Yep.
That's why pesticides really got big in the first place, right? Is because if a farmer loses his crop, then they could be out of business, right? The farm could be finished, right? So the spraying helps mitigate their crops going bad. I think that's why it originally kind of started, right?
Yeah, and it's also crop insurance. If you want to get crop insurance, you gotta abide to certain practices as well. Also, obviously to minimize it. Yeah, so some of the farmers that definitely using some more novel approaches sometimes have issues getting crop insurance because if you have a whole wide variety of crops, right, it's very hard for a insurer or to make a risk management of that, right? But the good news is that also within the government, there's sometimes a little bit more talk about regenerative agriculture, and it's kind of seeping into the larger branches of government. There's a sort of a ground roots movement going on with farmers moving over. So it's definitely, I mean, it's not on the decline. It's definitely on the up. But over time, I'd say we need a whole lot more of this. But with anything, these are incremental changes, right? And with the Green Revolution, it maybe made sense to sort of move towards the specialization high input, because external diesel was cheap, external inputs were cheap, fertilizer was cheap. We had calorie or food shortages. So producing as much food as efficiently as possible when the inputs were cheap, it made total sense in the 60s and 70s to do that. But what we're now finding out is that, well, maybe this is not as sustainable because we're eroding soil. We are having accumulation or runoff of fertilizers. Corn prices are rising because of fossil fuel prices are rising. So if we can minimize some of those inputs and kind of find a balance between that, then try to maintain the productivity while doing it in more agroecological ways. Yeah, I think that's the place we want to get towards, because we also have to be realistic. We're not going to, we're a market economy. There's going to be big players in the market. But if we can get sort of a bigger uptake of that also from large producers, then I think we can make a dent in this.
Yeah, I feel like the incentives are just all wrong, throughout so many parts of this process, right? Not being able to get crop insurance if you're not spraying with pesticides. Well, look at the incentive there, right? Dr. Mark Hyman's great book called Food Fix. He talks a lot about how there's so many incentives for a farmer to produce, corn, soy, and wheat versus, organic produce or something like that, for example, right? And then we have, he also mentions in that book, I forget the exact number, but it's in the book Food Fix by Dr. Mark Hyman, which I really love that book. He talks about how I think it was around 10% of Coca-Cola's U.S. revenues come from food stamps. So we're now subsidizing people to get Coca-Cola and eat GMO foods that are sprayed with pesticides. So it just feels like the incentives really need to be changed here.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And unfortunately, it is one of the most commonly consumed or bought items using food stamps is indeed soda. Which is a shame because it provides no nutritive value. And certainly there's been some lobbying in that regard, right? And I 100% agree. And, maybe punishing is not the best way, but incentivizing sometimes on farmers market, you have like double up bucks, right? Where your food stamps count double. I know some farmers markets have that, or also some grocery stores to incentivize, buying more fresh produce as opposed to soda. So I think those type of incentives make that worth more. I think is the way to go, as opposed to saying someone can't do something. That's sort of my idea. I mean, that's also very hard to change because you cannot, at this point at least, you cannot say to someone, hey, you can't buy Coca-Cola with this food stamp. But what you can do is nudging someone in the direction of buying fruits and vegetables and meat and milk and eggs that is unprocessed, by maybe having those food stamps have a higher value for that. And I think, that would be the way to go. But those are always, changing food policies is notoriously hard, or policy with anything, right? It's like moving a mountain.
Yeah. I was curious, what did the documentary that I mentioned, Kiss the Ground? Have you seen that one? Do you like that one? Do you think that's a good place for people who want to kind of learn more? I think it's on Netflix, right?
Yeah, I've watched it a couple of years ago. And it was. I enjoyed watching it. Of course, it's sort of that's also the scientist in me, is that will probably be a pretty boring documentary if I make it, because I'd be like put in a lot of ifs and buts. But that's with any documentary, really, right? Right. But no, I enjoyed the documentary, and I think there should be a part 2 coming out at some point. So.
Oh, nice, very cool. Any other resources maybe that you provide, or as we kind of come to a close here, any other resources for people listening who want to learn more about agroecology, regenerative farming, these kind of practices, either through yourself or other resources that you know of?
There's certainly, so I'm active on Twitter. You can find me at Van Vliet Ph.D. and usually post our research there in a little thread about sort of a layman's interpretation. My Google Scholar profile as well. You can find all my publications. We always make it a point to make these open access so that they don't end up behind a paywall when no one reads it, or maybe 100 fellow colleagues read it. But so we try to do that. And then, there's a number, I think, of good books also that have been written, sort of, Dirt to Soil by Gabe Brown. I enjoyed David Montgomery's book. I think it's called You Are What Your Food Ate, I think. David Montgomery, he outlines it very well. Regenerative Agriculture is a very recent book, well referenced as well. So those are certain things where people could look into. And I mean, my biggest sort of pet peeve is just connect with your local farmer. I mean, most people, if you seek it out and if you have a true interest in it, can find a local farmer. See if you can buy from him directly, or go to some farmers markets, talk with your local farmer. Because most of the folks that are at farmers market are people that are using agroecological practices, or, and are proud of their practices and are typically willing to share it, or even let you, visit their farm or their farm stand where you can kind of see it with your own eyes. And I think it's also a good way of becoming connected to your food. I know in our, busy lives and current economy, their convenience is a big thing, but at least if, once a summer you can visit the farm or something like that and buy something directly from the farmer. I think that's a good experience, so that you understand that milk doesn't come out of a package, but actually comes out of a cow, and that your carrots are actually grown in soil, and that someone has spent time working on that. As opposed to it finding in a plastic bag in the produce aisle.
That's right. Well, this has been amazing. At Van Vliet on Twitter. That's at VANVLIET on Twitter. That's the best way. That's where you're most active.
It's Van Vliet Ph.D. So the letters Ph.D. behind my name. Yep.
At Van Vliet Ph.D.
No, that's where I'm most active. And then other than that, I mean, if you search for my name on YouTube, you can find many webinars also about our work, grass-fed, grain-fed beef, sort of slideshow presentations that I've given for people that are more interested in this and interested in seeing some of the figures and data on that. So YouTube would be another good resource to find videos of me.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing this knowledge. I'm so excited about this topic. Thank you for the work that you're doing. It's such important work to be done. So thank you for everything you're doing, and thank you for sharing your knowledge with everyone here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, can you please leave us a rating or review and subscribe? I've realized that while we have actually increased our downloads a lot, we're actually getting a lot of downloads, which I'm really happy about. We actually have very few ratings. And I realized that I've never asked people really to rate much. So I'm asking you now if you could please rate and review and subscribe. And if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to anyone that you think will get value out of this. Also, if you haven't checked out our line of products at buypeakperformance.com, you get 20% off your first order. That's www.buypeakperformance.com. We have some incredible products, including our organic high-altitude coffee. If you don't know this, coffee is one of the most heavily sprayed with pesticides out of any crop. So it's really important that you drink organic coffee. We've gone above and beyond to source what we believe is the highest quality and healthiest organic coffee in the world. We're also famous for our organic green superfood powder. You can get 20% off of that as well at buypeakperformance.com. We also have an organic vegan and paleo plant protein. See, most of the vegan proteins out there are using brown rice protein, which is really not a good source of protein, and it's also a grain. And if you're paleo, you know that grains tend to cause inflammation in some cases for some people. And so we wanted to make one that was paleo friendly and vegan and organic. We made an amazing amino acid profile, so it's really one of the best plant proteins for muscle building. So you can check out Peak Performance Organic Plant Protein. You can find that on our website. Of course, all our products are on Amazon as well. So thanks again. And again, please, if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to someone who you feel can get value out of it. And please leave us a rating, review, and subscribe. Thank you.